breaking news. The fence confining the elk at Point Reyes National Seashore has finally come down. In a monumental victory for environmental advocates, a groundbreaking $30 million settlement will eradicate private ranching from this cherished area. This change allows the elk to roam free for the first time in decades. Activist Jack Gescheidt, who has tirelessly advocated for the elk, joins us to share his insights. While wildlife advocates celebrate this pivotal shift towards restoring the park's ecosystem, ranchers are feeling the pressure as the elk venture onto their lands. Hi there, Jack. Thanks for joining us. Tell us what's the latest. What's going on now with this breaking story?
Hi, Lindsey. Good morning, everyone. An historic deal really has occurred now. One of two ongoing lawsuits, both of them about 3 years long, has been reached a negotiated settlement in which, to be very brief about it, all three elk herds at Point Reyes National Seashore will finally be reunited, which has never been the case. The fenced Tule Elk, so-called Tule Elk Reserve, which was deadly in killing elk because they couldn't get out during drought seasons, that fence is already partially dismantled. Excuse me, I've got a cold. The rest of the fence will come down. Those elk will be free to mingle and mix and mate with the other two freer ranging herds. I don't call any free ranging because of the cattle ranches, but that's the other part of this very significant settlement, which is 12 of 14 ranches and all 6 dairies and 6 beef ranches, the two different kinds of cows that are exploited in Point Reyes National Seashore, will be moving out. They've agreed voluntarily, signing a deal, taking multi-million-dollar payments to leave Point Reyes National Park in the next 15 months.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to get into the whole background of that in a moment, but I have to ask you this question. How do you feel, Jack? I mean, you've been working on this story. I've been covering this story with you for almost 4 years, I think, maybe 3. And how do you feel about what's going on now?
Classic journalist question. How does that make you feel, Jack? So I've been on this about 5 years. About a year in, a little less, I met In Defense of Animals, who hired me as a consultant. They were great to work with, been supportive of dozens of demonstrations I've done. I ended up leading all but one of the first water drops to bring water to the elk, to help elk a little bit, but also as a publicity device to get people to pay attention. And I didn't know how I felt because I've been just plodding away on this thing for so long against all odds that it wasn't until I went out on Wednesday, December 4th to the elk fence and saw 85 fence posts removed, which is about a quarter mile of a 2-mile long fence. An eighth, the entire fence was removed by the Park Service very quickly before the ranchers, or as I say, the cattle ranching empire fought back and stopped removing all the fence, which was frozen in limbo. But the fence was down, about a quarter mile of it, and I stood there with another friend of mine. I think you have a clip of this.
I have a clip. Let me show the clip.
Yeah. So this is the elk fence that's been in place for 46 years. Smallest Point Reserve. There's the cattle guard. But then on this side of the fence, they have cut down, oh God, I don't know, maybe 50 posts. So the fence is down. You can see way off in the distance there. They haven't cut it all down. Not the ones in the foreground. It's in the distance there. And they have released, and there's an elk moving into position already. Just a few hours ago, these fences were cut, and the elk are now moving to cross the fence line to be, for the first time in 46 years, free to walk south at this position without having to find a hole in the fence if there ever was one.
Wow, that is so amazing. But you were just getting into a little bit more about they've only taken down a piece of the fence so far, and then the cattle ranchers, of course, immediately got up in arms. So go into that a little bit if you would, and then we'll backtrack.
Well, a couple things have happened. It's very complicated. We could spend hours in this. I know we're trying to keep it, in a reasonable amount of time. But on December 2nd, the National Park Service released their final decision saying they were going to take the elk fence down, which was a separate matter, actually, from this agreement that was reached with another lawsuit. There's 2 lawsuits. I was the lead plaintiff in one, Gescheidt versus Howland. along with other plaintiffs, which was challenging just the elk reserve itself. Like, you can't take elk in a wilderness area and fence them in. It's hard. It's killing the elk, literally. And that pressured the Park Service. Of course, they never admit what gets them to change the policy, but they came out with a final decision on December 2nd saying we're going to take the fence down. And then the very next day, amazingly, because the Park Service is typically a bureaucracy that moves slowly, actually, that's a great shot right there. On the left side, you get to see what cows and the cattle ranching industry does. It's not the cows' fault, of course, but it just beats all the vegetation down. And on the right side is where you have only Tule Elk, the fence line. I'm standing on the fence. It's an 8-foot tall fence. It keeps the keeps the elk from getting into the cow pasture, God forbid. They wouldn't do any harm. But all that vegetation there is what natural wildlife animals do to the land, which is no harm. They actually benefit the land. We're going to get into that because it's the huge ongoing propaganda war about cattle ranching being, this is all BS, hence the air quotes, stewards of the land, historic, small, organic. And the latest one, the clean coal of the cattle industry, is regenerative ranching, which means you move cows around over more area, theoretically spreading out the manure, which it does. But of course, as soon as you put cows into natural lands, wild lands, you must drive out the animals, the wild animals. They're diametrically opposed land uses. And that's something that Albert Strauss, my, shall I say, opponent in this, who's saying, "Oh, this is going to put us out of business, and we're doing such a great job," it's just utter nonsense. They're the major polluters in the park. Cattle ranches are the major polluters of the park. So this historic agreement, separate from the fence, is between 3 different nonprofit organizations that filed suit against the Park Service for their management of the pasture lands, meaning letting ranchers, business operations as usual, pollute and destroy the land and contaminate the water. And of course, in all this, I even haven't mentioned, and I need to mention it front and center, methane, methane, methane. You can regeneratively graze cattle you want to move them around. It's actually more methane generated because they're eating more roughage if they're grass-fed. The stuff that consumers are told, oh, it's grass-fed, organic beef or dairy products. That is nothing to do with the ecological impact, the devastating ecological impact of cattle ranching. So that's why I actually got involved in this. It's not just for those gorgeous elk that I fell in love with. Standing out there at that fence and watching the rest of that clip you started showing is 2 bull elk, meaning boys with antlers, walked across that beautiful guy. Those guys, within just hours of that fence being cut open partially, they found freedom. They walked, oh, what's around here? And they were sniffing and sensing and like, oh, this is different, because they've never known that fence not to be there. So that was really emotional and exciting. And that brought tears to my eyes. That was a beautiful thing, because you sit here at a desk and make your activist stuff, but you forget the actual impact on the land. You got to go out there and see it and feel it.
Right. I want to go back a little bit so people that are still not convinced can see the damage putting that fence up did. And I do believe I have a clip here. Let me just scroll down. I apologize for this. Where we actually show you guys bringing in water. Let's do the water rescue.
And we wanted to just check in with you and tell you how it went. It went really, really well. The short story is we have 2 troughs filled to the brim, out there, away from sight, no rangers in sight, no one knows we've come and gone.
So talk a little bit about what was going on and why you felt the need to go in there as a group of, I don't know how many people you commandeered to get together there and trudge up there with the water, only to have the tanks destroyed by the Park Services a couple of days later. So just tell us a little bit of what was going on, the drought, and how it was affecting them. I'm going to show some pictures that may be disturbing to some. So go ahead, Jack, please.
Well, if you're going to show disturbing pictures, I want to let those land and not interrupt them. But
no, go ahead.
I credit this idea to an organization called forelk.org. Diana Oppenheim was the first one to really focus on the elk as the problem at Point Reyes, when the problem is ranching, but it's a much different and difficult message to get across to people. Hey, cows are polluting Point Reyes Seashore. Like, what does it even mean? And you can't see it. And these are good cows. I mean, there's so much mythology and misinformation blocking people from understanding. There you go. Look at the land there, folks. Look at that land. It's beaten to dirt. Thousands of acres of land beaten to dirt. But how do you get that across to people? Hey, this shouldn't be happening, because they don't know, and they're lied to about it by the cattle industry. So the idea was to bring water to the elk who were fenced for the cattle industry. They're fenced behind the 8-foot Tule Elk reserve fence. So a reserve is ironically named a reserve when it's actually the thing that prevents elk from moving freely inside a national park, a 71,000 acre park, and the elk are reduced to a 2,600 acre reserve. A tiny bit of land. And of course, it was drought stricken. It was the least desirable land for the ranchers. So when the elk were reintroduced to the park, a native species reintroduced, unlike European cows, who are if you want to use the word invasive, there's no better descriptor for European cows, because they behave differently, they act differently, they eat more, they drink more water, they pulverize
than other cows, or differently than the elk? Are you to just make that distinction?
I'm sorry, and thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to cover a lot of material here, but elk and cows have they're both hooved animals, both ungulates, but they have completely different impact on the land, because one has evolved over thousands of years to be on that landscape in California, where they were once numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Tule elk, a subspecies of elk, native to California. Cows were brought in, 150, 160, 70 years ago. And of course, they're now bred into these monstrosities. They're victims themselves, but bigger, fatter, grow faster, fed tons. They poop a heck of a lot more, which goes onto the land. Rains come and wash that into the water.
Genetically modified cows, really.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All of it. And even if they're organic, the cows themselves have been genetically modified to become these giant animals that are, exploited and tortured, and their babies taken away if they're dairy cows, and on and on and on. It's just, we need to, as activists and those fellow demonstrators and activists, know to get this information out there, to counter the ranching narratives, the PR of the industry, the advertising, the propaganda of the industry. So the idea was to bring water to the elk as a way to capture the public's imagination, which is the elk are dying because they're fenced, because they can't get out of there during a drought, which was seasonally now. In 2020 was that was a 2020 August, I think, drop that you showed. That was one of 7 we did, because it was effective. People, oh my God, they can relate to that. Oh, these poor elk are dying. And you're going to show some pictures of dead elk on the ground, I imagine, taken by Matthew Palvarosa Klein, God bless him, a National Geographic freelance contributor who was, in tears photographing these dead elk who weren't dying in the other areas. And that was the only water in that place. Well, actually, that's my shot, but that was near that pond. And, elk die typically, but they were dying by the hundreds. The population in that reserve dropped precipitously in the 2 drought seasons. And there again, the difference between what cows do on the left and what elk, don't do, which is they don't desiccate everything. That's a manure spreader. That's liquid manure being poured on the land by a ranching truck, a farming, if you want to call it, truck. It's insane. That's not natural. It's destructive to the land. It's smothering the land, coating it with liquefied manure. This is organic, free-range, grass-fed, good, small, historic farms, dairy or beef, either way. It was destructive. Oh, and that's another thing we got in the settlement. There will be no more liquefied manure spreading at all. And there will also be no more silage mowing, Another thing that happens, which is they basically, in the spring, they mow down acres and acres of grass and vegetation to then turn into silage, which is fed to the cows later on in the season. But think about that. A giant industrial mower in a national park cutting down fields of vegetation. They kill baby deer who are sleeping in there and hiding. They're killing nesting birds. I mean, it's just everything about ranching is not natural. Everything about ranching is ecologically destructive. And I want to keep going back to that point. If people get nothing else from this talk, it's not just about the elk, who should be free in a national park, of course. It's about the monstrous destructiveness ecologically, as well as, morally, the harm to cows done, which is, raising cows for human consumption, whether it's dairy product.
Let me clarify one thing, though, because maybe just in my mind, I didn't hear it. So how, now when they're saying the cows do this regenerative kind of thing with the land, and when you take them off, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What actually will happen when the cows are completely removed? How will that land? And because we've seen the brush fires here in California, how will we be ensured, because that's a big pushback, that that land will not get overgrown and cause fires, etc.?
So on my treespiritproject.com webpage /regenerative BS, I cite many articles, not just me pontificating here. I'm a smart guy, but I'm no scientist, so I read what scientists say and the studies have said that are not financed by the cattle industry, and I learned that regenerative is just BS. It's, as I say, the clean coal of the cattle industry. Regenerative ranching. You move the cows around a larger area, and the idea is it stimulates grass growth and it adds net carbon to the soil. You know, arguably, in the best possible circumstances, maybe 30%, maybe 35% improvement in carbon sequestration, but it's still a net loss, a net carbon emissions. And then again, with all those, when you hear people talking about regenerative ranching, listen for the word methane, because you won't hear it. That doesn't go away. Cows produce more methane when they're eating more grass, as opposed to in a feedlot down in Bakersfield, which everybody knows is terrible and smells bad because it's concentrated, but it's actually a more efficient way ecologically to raise cows. And of course, that's horrible and cruel and smells bad. And you know that's bad. It just spreads that damage out over more land. And we don't have enough land to spread out 350 million Americans eating that much meat and dairy products to do regenerative ranching everywhere. It's just a complete mythology.
Okay.
And it's obviously so.
Yes. Let me give you another question, another pushback. What's going to happen to the workers? There's a lot going on in the news about these workers losing their homes and losing their jobs, and what will become of them. So can you address that for us?
Yes, but I realize I didn't answer your first question, which is what's going to happen to the land out at Point Reyes with the cows off it? Well, the land's going to heal.
Go ahead. Do it a little bit. Keep going here because we're going to run out of time.
Okay. So ranch workers, ranch hands, the mostly undocumented, their description by the ranch owners who run them like a plantation and have their I call them slaves, working for slave wages, less than minimum wage, no benefits. All of a sudden, now that this deal went down, all of a sudden they trot them out, exploiting the workers one last time to say, oh, the poor workers are going to be pushed off the land because they're living in our dilapidated housing we charge them to live in, docking their pay. I mean, it's just the most, it makes me crazy. The gall, the temerity.
There is money being allotted for there's also money being allotted, right? And we'll get back to the land. You'll get to answer that. But there is money being allotted too.
So the ranchers are being paid an undisclosed amount, a total of the ranch families that took it 30 to 40 million paid for by the Nature Conservancy that is invited in as a mediator and came up with money they raised to pay those folks, the ranchers, to leave. They're paid once again. They won't say that. They won't say they're getting millions of dollars. Oh, the poor ranchers, who are then complaining, oh, these poor workers. Well, they can give them some money if they'd like. Only the Nature Conservancy, because they actually care a bit, raised $2.5 million, which will be help these workers transition out of the park, maybe jobs training, however it will be used. The details are to be worked out. But it's just, there's, I don't know, arguably 70, 80, 90 people that will be affected by this. And some of them are families of the ranch workers who are living in this dilapidated housing for free, and they have no legal right to be there. And
we have to invite the ranchers on to dispute. We have no proof that they're bringing their people in and living there for free. So I just have to bring that up, that we invite them on at any time to give their side of the story. They have not contacted us so far, but we would love to dialogue with them.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely true. I mean, there is no documentation. There's no leases from the ranch owners to the ranch workers. The way you sign a lease when you live somewhere, none of that exists. So they can claim anything and they're not showing any proof of anything. So who knows? I mean, to be fair, but there was a study. There have been a few studies about, and some reporting in the Pacific Sun, North Bay Bohemian, Peter Byrne, a hard-hitting journalist, and Skyware Thomas had done a film. He interviewed some of the ranch workers and documented a ranch worker on camera, hiding his face and his voice for fear of reprisal, talking about their conditions, with broken sewer lines. And I mean, it's just, there is proof of that if you want, whereas the ranch workers have nothing but their claims.
Right. Okay. So my next question, this is a big mystery, and I don't know if you can answer this for us, Jack. What made all of a sudden, what was the big change? We know the National Forestry Service was not helping you or agreeing with you in any way. They took your water away. What made them change over to taking down the fence and going forward with this action, do you think?
It's a great question. And to play by your rules, which is fine, which is, what do you know factually? Yeah. We don't know. That's the bottom line. I can only speculate with, a fair amount of information and some education about the issue. They were under a lot of pressure. Their businesses are hurting anyway. Dairies only exist anywhere, let alone in California. I can't speak to the rest of the country. And at Point Reyes because of massive public subsidies. So their businesses are hurting. People are switching off of dairy products, of course. Prices go up. They're only, again, in existence because they're getting free water from the park. I mean, they have these incredible deals where they get, 8,000 square foot of housing, 1,000 acres, and they're paying $3,500 a month. And that's paid for by the park service not charging them full market rate, which would be, tenfold that. So they're surviving on public taxpayers, largesse, just gifts. Wow. So that was a pressure they were feeling. They'd been in negotiations. The suit was almost 3 years long and mediation 2 years. And then the Nature Conservancy came in and said, look, take the golden parachute, take a few $1 million and leave the park and you can retire. You can also move your cows out somewhere else. Some of them, I don't know the number, but I know I'm told many of the ranchers have properties elsewhere. Albert Strauss, who's running his mouth right now, doesn't have property in the park. He's just pulling cheap milk from 2 dairies. So he's going to have to find alternative sources, which he'll do. And life will go on. But he's going around claiming this is the end of dairying in Marin. Well, not really. It's a continued slow death of dairying Marin because it's an industry whose time has come and gone.
So again,
did I answer any of your questions?
Yes, I have to invite. Tell me his name again. I'm sorry, I wasn't familiar with his name.
Albert Strauss of Strauss Organic Food.
On to give his side of the story. He's welcome on UnchainedTV at any time to give his side of the story.
I would please do, and if he accepts, I would also say have an opponent on because he'll just lie. He'll just tell truths like.
Again, we can't substantiate that he's lying, so we want to stay away from that.
That's my claim. That's Jack Gescheidt saying he lies. Yes, not you.
Okay, Jack. Let's move on, if you would. Okay, my next question, and this is again a little. We're going to try and stay out of politics here, but what do you think the new administration? How will this affect it? We know how drill they are. So, what do you think will be their stance on this? Will they try to prevent it and bring the ranchers back in? Is that a fear? What do you think?
I just got to laugh at the paradox of your question. Let's not talk politics, but what do you think about the new administration coming into Washington, D.C.?
I don't want to talk about whether we're Democrats, Republicans. I really don't care. Personally, I'm about the issues, and that's my stance. But yeah, we just want to talk about, do you think the new administration will somehow stop this from going through? I guess that's my fear. And what do you think?
No, I don't think they will. Yes, I think they're pro-rancher and pro-business. That's no big surprise. It's not a slight. It's just a reality, at least my opinion of a reality. But this is settled. I mean, can they inject themselves in it if they really wanted? On all the other things they're busy with, I don't think this is their number one concern, even though one of the ranchers, who will go unnamed, I don't need to name him, has had access to Trump before, and maybe he'll go running to him. But that rancher took the money. He took the millions of payout, undisclosed amount, and is leaving. So why would he go do that and try to blow up a deal when he accepted the money? I mean, if I were him, it's like, let me get out of this business and give me a little a golden parachute to leave the business now. And why keep fighting in your 60s to do something that you know is a dying industry anyway? So I don't think the Trump administration is going to mess with it. I don't. But, that's my speculation for sure.
Right? Yeah. All right, Jack. Believe it or not, we're already a half hour into the time. So I want to give you a little bit of time now to anything we haven't covered. And if I have another question that comes up or from the audience, we also would love to hear. We have several people watching and we'd love to hear from them. They've been commenting, but you have a question for Jack. And then maybe we'll get into your background a little quickly. So anything else that you want to add now, and then let's talk a little bit about your background too.
I'll just end with a quick wrap up, which is all 3 elk herds will be reunited. The 2 mile infamous, deadly 8-foot tall Tule Elk Reserve fence will be coming down in the next 15 months. That's part of the deal. I don't know when that's going to happen in the 15 months, but that's the deal. And all 6 dairies in the park have accepted the deal to take money and leave voluntarily, despite, now they're whining that they're forced to do it, my opinion. And then 6 beef ranches in the park are moving out, and that makes 12 of the 14 ranches, beef and dairy, in Point Reyes Seashore have agreed to leave in the next 15 months. And we environmentalists wanted all of the ranches out, and we wanted no more grazing ever permitted. And we're not getting those things. It is a compromise. And among us activists, we've had lots of discussion. Is the glass half full of milk or half emptied of milk? And my assessment is it's both, and depends how you want to look at it. You can bitch and moan about what we didn't get and how this is crazy. There's still going to be something called targeted grazing, which in my opinion is another mythology. Targeted grazing to keep fire danger down. Just cows are the problem. The reason there's fire danger in the park in the first place. That photo with the fence in the middle and elk and cow territory here, which is dry European grasses created by the cows that's flammable, and which is evergreen like coyote brush you saw there, which is there's a great picture. Look at the land that the elk are wading through, and they don't destroy that. And the poor cows are stuck in these lots, and they beat the land down to dirt. So, which is harmful. It's so obvious when you look at the pictures and just have an open mind about it. And thank you. There's that incredible photograph. It just shows the dramatic distinction. The fence separates elk territory from what cows do to beat down the land. So you can go on and say anything you want about, regenerative ranching. Well, gosh, there's what ranching looks like.
I want to just jump in for a second and tell everyone that you're watching UnchainedTV, which is a free streaming network, global streaming network. And all you have to do is go to watch.unchainedtv.com, download the app. I don't think you even have to download the app to watch it, but that's how we got here. And I'm Lindsey Baker with Action Hour. Jack, I want to talk a little bit about your background, but before I do, I just want to tell people how wonderfully, and I'm going to make you maybe a little embarrassed here, how wonderful what you've done has been. I watched you for the past 4 years. You used your admin skills, New York admin skills, to go into all kinds of crazy, I called it a stunt when you dressed up in cow outfits and stuff, but it worked, and you did all sorts of things and stayed on this. You literally treaded water with many other people that, of course, have done wonderful things, like the photographer you mentioned, etc. There's so many people. There's Skylar and all the other people that have helped you. We don't want to not mention them. When you start mentioning, then you leave someone out. But I just wanted to tell people how hard you've worked on this and what you've done to make this happen, and say that this is inspirational, that we can all take what we have to offer, like your skills as an admin, and really make change in the world. And I just want to commend you for that. So I just wanted to tell you that.
Well, thank you, Lindsey. Yeah, I don't live for the appreciation, but it's certainly nice, especially when there's a success. Everybody runs in to claim credit. And I was definitely one of the lead activists out there, taking an idea from Diana, in my opinion. I didn't come up with the idea to bring water in, but that's where I met In Defense of Animals, who I'll give a credit here to many people. But IDA, In Defense of Animals, we met during that first water drop. Their communications director, Flair Dawes, liked what I was doing, liked the cut of my jib, and said, would you come, do work for us as a consultant? So I've been working with them part-time for the last, 4.5 years. In addition to my own Tree Spirit project, where I talk about other issues as well. I used to be a forest advocate. I still am, but that's how I got to see Cowspiracy in 2014, and shamefully learned that the number one reason we cut down trees globally is to raise cows for human consumption. That was still I can't believe that I had to verify it. When you hear something that gives you what they call cognitive dissonance, no, that can't be. I would have known about that, or that's so absurd. And it's just intellectual. You can't see the effects. I can't go to the Amazon and I can see pictures of it and assume that's what it's for. But that's what turned me into an animal rights advocate and an anti-cow industry. I call it cattle industry, which is the ownership term, but cow industry, if you will, is just. And then, of course, I was willing to face the cruelty issues, which is why I've become a vegan, of course, for the past 10 years since seeing that film. It was not easy for me. And then I also want to credit the three organizations who brought the current lawsuit that was resolved in mediation finally that's led to this historic change, even though so many people contribute and put pressure on. And the Park Service gets it from all angles. But that's the Resource Renewal Institute, Western Watersheds Project, and the Center for Biological Diversity, wonderful organizations with great people, pushed on this one. We got support from, I think Harvard Animal Law and Policy program out of Harvard, who did the lawsuit specifically, and that was the one I was a plaintiff in, thanks to Jim Coda, a retired Park Service attorney who's on our side of this, the side of right in this issue, my opinion, who helped, get that lawsuit going and brought me into it, said, do you want to be a plaintiff? And I was like, suing the federal government? I don't think so. And then I got educated and like, oh yeah, I do. And my father, my late father, who was politically active, would be proud of me.
Yeah.
And, honestly, a strange way to put it, but I got nothing better to do. I want to have an impact on the world and try to save this beautiful, natural, wild planet, what little remains of it. And that includes ending the largest driver of the climate crisis and deforestation, which is, as you know, Lindsey, the cow industry. So I found this way to talk about elk for sure. And I love the elk. I've got a giant picture of an elk right here on my wall. I'm a photographer, but it was a way to address the larger issue, which is to tell people, as I will here, cattle, eating cow products, dairy products, and beef is the way you kill wildlife and destroy the planet ecologically. And it's such a general term, it's hard to get across to people, but most people don't want to hear that. It's just too upsetting, and they don't want to stop their habits.
Well, it's ironic that, a lot of the people that are involved, environmentalists, they're meat eaters, and they don't even recognize the fact that what the impact is of dairy and beef. But things are changing, and it's starting now. I think for the first time, there were speakers at the latest COP convention. In fact, there's something going on right now, all day today, VCOP. So we're going to probably wrap up in the next few minutes. We did get a question from Tom, and he said, what about the wolves? I wasn't quite sure what that question was. It was something about the other animals that are affected, I suppose.
So all wildlife, all wild animals in the park will benefit from removing destructive industry.
Wolves was this here. Ask Jack, is bison also a factor in wolves?
So there are no bison and no wolves in Point Reyes, if that's your question. And if you're just saying in general about the cattle industry's effect on bison and wolves, absolutely. But bison, oh my God. I could go into detail on either of these issues, but all wildlife is affected by cattle ranching. It's the biggest use of public lands in this nation is cattle ranching, more so than the crops we grow to feed humans more efficiently, which is with plants. And cattle grazing is something the industry lobbies hard through Washington and pushes to get. Well, how did Point Reyes Seashore end up becoming a national park, but still have commercial businesses in it that pollute it? And that's the power of the lobby.
And they were getting discounts on the taxpayers' dollars. I mean, they were paying for, it was cheap. That was one of the things they said is how we afford to move, right? But anyway, what was my last question here? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just kind of.
No, it's okay. So Wildlife Services, which is a quietly named Orwellian organization, a department of the USDA, its only purpose is to kill animals, wild animals, to benefit the cattle industry. That's on my website also. I put up a page because I couldn't believe it when I found out about it, which is, only, 8 years ago or so, which is treespiritproject.com/wildlife services. And you just, there's so many ways. If people are willing to open their minds and willing to hear information that's new, it's abundant. It's hidden in plain sight, as they say, to stop. And the simplest thing, the great thing about this issue, the simple fix, you folks, people listening, if you're not already vegan, if you just change what goes on your fork when you eat, you can make a huge impact on, everything. The environment, the climate, aka global warming. I call it global heating or climate emergency. And then, of course, you won't be torturing animals every day. Blood ritual, as another vegan activist put it, 3 times a day blood ritual of torturing animals. But people don't know it. I didn't know it. I don't. It's not like I diss people for not knowing. Right. Sometimes I can diss people for not wanting to hear the truth, but, I'm Jewish, so that's a whole long history of I don't want to know what's going on. Everything's going fine. It triggers me for sure. But I was there. I didn't want to know either. Same as me.
You were just there trying to enjoy the beautiful landscape and do your tree spirit stuff there, taking photos. So you started off in photography, correct?
Yeah, professional photographer since 1987. Both my parents were pros as well. Before that, as you said, I was an advertising copywriter for 6 years, which taught me a lot of skills. It was really useful, and I now get to use those skills for good.
Yeah. So what's your next project?
Well, this one isn't done for sure. We have to stay on it and counter the propaganda. Now, as I say, the cattle empire is pushing back.
They are.
In addition to that, the other big piece of information that I put forth is that we don't need to cut down our forests in order to be safe from wildfire. That's the next industry, which is scaring people like, oh, you got to cut down the trees. And well, in LA, the reason there's fires down there is because of the climate crisis, because of a heating, drying climate, not because there's trees. You can't, even if you cut down all the trees everywhere, it still won't stop fires. Then you'll have fast moving grass fires that still burn our houses. So defensible space and home hardening is the key to any house structure we care about surviving even in a wildfire. It's a science that also is on my treespiritproject.com website /wildfire. All about that. And there's industries that are convincing. I'm sorry?
People can go to your website and learn about what can be done to prevent wildfires. Is that, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting everything. Yeah. Is that
and thank you, Lindsey. But it's such a tough one because there's no quick fix for it because we're already into the climate crisis. And now we're, barreling faster ahead, dropping out of the climate conference and a whole nother topic of politics for sure. I mean, do you believe in the climate crisis? At this point, these days, there are people like, I don't want to believe it. And there's now lots of disinformation to say we don't have to believe it. So there's that, which is really
There's
scary.
always a new battle. We're not going to be done for a long time. But this would certainly mitigate the new ruling about not having to have electric cars, which that's a whole other argument, pro and con. I don't know that electric cars are less polluting. I've heard that there's a lot goes into the batteries and running it, and that's just as bad, but I'm not an expert on that. My point is, it could mitigate a lot if we just stop eating animals, and it's so easy. And we're as vegans, we know, and on Unchained TV, we have tons of shows, cooking shows, to teach you easily how to transform your diet. And have it be a lot of fun. So
to emphasize what you said, yes, Lindsey. Not everybody can afford an electric car or buy a Prius, which gets 50 instead of 25 mpg. But everybody can. I mean, the other thing too is like, oh, you white privileged people, you're espousing your crazy vegan diet. I'm eating huge amounts of fresh vegetable and rice and potatoes and grains and legumes and peas and lentils and there's so much. And tofu, of course, because, I'm in California, you got to eat tofu or they boot you out of the state. So all that stuff is just so easy and less expensive, actually. So it's the simplest thing you can do to have the biggest impact without relying on any corporation to change its behavior. Good luck with that.
Your own food, too, in your backyard.
And you can grow your own food in your backyard. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Jack, it's been lovely as always. And I'm so glad that today when you came on, you could tell me about your victory. Because as I said, I've been following this story with you, and I'm delighted that you have such good news to share with us. Any last words before we go off, Jack?
I didn't do it. Any last words? Thank you very much for having me on. Please check out my website, treespiritproject.com. I'll be working on wildfire issues. We need more forests, more trees, not fewer. And take a look at my /vegan page too. It's easier than you think, and once you change, you won't have that low-grade guilt underneath. Thanks for having me, Lindsey. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll put some credits on the end to show how to get in touch with you when we edit this for the final. So thanks for being on, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your questions. I'll be back next time with another amazing activist. So stay tuned for the next Action Hour. And Jack, thanks for being on today.
Thank you, Lindsey.